So I'm back to this Yeti mic because that Shure microphone needs a little bit of help. So I got a cloud stepper for it. It'll probably be here tomorrow, but it probably won't be ready for the stream tomorrow for the Nindies. But hey, going forward after this anyway, we should at least be up to pretty good quality with microphones. But for now, we'll use the Yeti. So we had the Google Stadia get revealed, and it seems like at this point, I actually have more questions than answers with this whole situation with Stadia. And I'm going to put this out there right away. After looking over it, I've taken some time. This is definitely not something that's going to be for me right away. I think there's a lot of traditional gamers who are going to look at this and say, yeah, it's not something that's going to be designed for me. And I've been trying to figure out who it's for, I guess, and that's a question I still have. So let's go over Google Stadia. It was revealed earlier today. It was in a full live stream they did at GDC. They had id Software show up to show off Doom Eternal somewhat. It's going to launch on this service, so there's that. They also had Ubisoft show up there with their CEO and everything, so that was cool as well. But overall, they really didn't show a lot of games or anything. In fact, their first-party stuff wasn't even ready, which is odd. I feel like they're going to be at E3, so keep that in mind. But we have quite a bit to go over here with Google Stadia, so stick with me here, and if you enjoy the video, make sure you like it and get subscribed, because I think Google Stadia is going to be in the news quite a bit, going up against xCloud. I'll say that again, going up against xCloud. I don't think this is going to be direct competition for any local systems. We'll see why here in a minute. But Google Stadia actually has been pretty much passed around the press quite a bit already. In fact, Digital Foundry had an early look at it, where they were invited for what appeared to be a closed door kind of reveal, and they showed it off and they tested it. And PC Gamer did a pretty good write-up of it alongside of specs for this thing, because of course they're running this off of something. For example, xCloud with Microsoft is running it off of actual Xbox Ones, so it looked like Google had to go get their own hardware, and they did. Technically, they built a system that's going to be kept in their data centers as blades that you see in, Intel or whoever, anyone's commercials, where they show off like server blades and stuff. And what's interesting about this, I want to put this out there. This possibly could give us a very, very slight glimpse into next generation for the next PlayStation and Xbox, like really powerful local systems, only because they actually used AMD, which was interesting because I kind of thought they would use NVIDIA, but they decided to go with AMD most likely because AMD is already pretty much knee-deep in creating the chips for the next generation PlayStation and Xbox, so probably putting together a custom AMD GPU and everything for this wasn't anything that would be too difficult. Honestly, they probably also gave him a better contract than NVIDIA. AMD is all about those contracts, so I'm sure they gave a much better deal than what NVIDIA did. So here we are now with a custom x86 processor clocked at 2.7 gigahertz, and then we have a custom AMD GPU with HBM2 memory, which HBM2 is usually pretty kind of pricey, so that's interesting. And then 56 compute units and 10.7 teraflops. I saw some people thinking that maybe this is where Vega 56 went, and hey, maybe it's possible, since they're moving on to Navi soon. But 10.7 teraflops, that is more powerful than the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro combined in terms of raw compute power. So it's pretty interesting to see that. 16 gigabytes of RAM that's shared between CPU and GPU, up to 484 gigabytes per second of bandwidth, which is much higher even than the Xbox One X, which I believe is 320 gigabytes per second. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's in the 300s for that. And then, of course, SSD cloud storage, not shocking there. So Digital Foundry did a full breakdown of this thing, and I was a bit surprised of the latency. It's actually not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Project Stream was a bit shaky. However, I want to put this out there before people get too excited. This was a controlled environment by Google, which means they were probably showing Digital Foundry the best that they could for this thing, okay? They weren't showing them like what you and I will probably face. I did use Project Stream at least with Assassin's Creed. I thought it was, all right, I thought it was pretty good. But for streaming, it was good. But I could still see some artifacting on screen, much like you would on a YouTube video if it decides to buffer at any point in time when I would move the camera around with Assassin's Creed. Otherwise, I think it at least worked well enough to need something like that in a pinch. But local is still better in terms of image quality by a great margin. But they did some tests on a Pixelbook with a Google Internet connection. Once again, a Google Internet connection. I have a feeling that's a pretty good connection. But but they saw Google Stadia with 166 milliseconds of latency, and the Project Stream they did before was actually 13 milliseconds higher. That's something you will still feel, of course, but once you start to get into the PC, it's pretty clear how far back that actually is, with something like 60 frames per second on PC actually being 79 milliseconds of issue there when you're like latency when you're moving around and everything. It's something you'll notice heavily if it's higher. And of course, a lot of times TVs will add to that. Lower refresh rate monitors will help with that. The Xbox One X, actually, if you're plugged into something like a 4K TV, is 145 milliseconds. So Google Stadia is actually a bit closer than you might think to the Xbox One X in terms of responsiveness. So that's actually kind of impressive there. It's still off, but not that far off. Again, I have a feeling we're going to use it at our house or something, and it'll be much different because this all goes by internet connection, and that is the big problem right now. So keep that in mind. These tests look good at face value, but it's going to be a case-by-case basis. Oh, yes. So if we go over to Ars Technica, they had a lot of screenshots and stuff from the stream, which is great to see. Just all the different little snapshots of it as you go through, where they really talk about everything here. They show all the devices. They showed the device when they plugged it into like a Pixel book, and then they went to like a phone, and I don't know if this was, again, a video that was being played and they were just kind of going through the motions, because some of those button presses didn't line up with what was happening on screen. And if that was more or less, again, latency, it looked kind of bad at times. Let's be honest about that. There were times where it looked a little sketchy. But the idea of going between all the different devices on the fly is pretty cool. And there is an interesting setup that they have for their controller that lets you do that quickly, which I thought was kind of a neat thing to see. And that actually has to do with their controller that I thought was okay, but the controller is a bit iffy for me as well. So this is their actual controller right here. It has a headphone jack, which Nintendo, even Google, know to put a headphone jack on there, but it has a headphone jack, and according to Digital Foundry, it actually feels very Xbox-like. So if you like the Xbox One controller, apparently thumbsticks and buttons and everything feel very similar. However, that D-pad is a bit iffy looking. I'm not a fan of the symmetrical I guess, joysticks on even like the PlayStation controller. I actually prefer the offset, like what we see with something like the Xbox One or the Switch Pro controller. I think it just feels better to me, but I think that's, of course, going to be preference. Now, what was really interesting about this controller that was described is that it actually connects to Wi-Fi. And the reason for that is to pretty much bypass whatever device you're on to try to combat latency even further. So the controller is not actually connected to your system. It's connected to, say, your router in your house, which sounds kind of weird, right? At first, you're saying, oh, that's odd. But think about it this way. If you do decide to transfer between devices, your controller won't need to reconnect to that device. So if you're kind of doing what they were doing there on screen, where they were going between a tablet and then a phone and then your TV or your computer, the controller will work completely the entire time. You'll just have to click and move around whenever you get to a new device. And that's the biggest thing that they are pushing here with Stadia, is that it's integrated with YouTube, essentially. So it's basically a game streaming service over their already streaming service been established through video with YouTube. So if you're watching a creator, I guess if they have it set up, I don't know how you, again, have that set up in the back end to make sure that just anyone won't join your game. But somehow you have it so that they'll join your game and it takes a couple of seconds, which is kind of cool to think about, that there is no patches, there's no install time, there's no downloading. You click a button and you start playing. That is, I think, the most compelling part about this whole situation, is that it doesn't take much to actually jump into a game. After doing something like The Division 2, where I had a massive patch, or Call of Duty, where I had a massive patch, yeah, that actually sounds like a pretty cool future. Fortunately, it's linked to streaming, which isn't something I'm 100% on board with for my own gaming preferences. So they did form their own like first-party studio that they announced, Stadia Games and Entertainment, and we kind of already knew about this after they made a bunch of hires and everything, and I'm not really sure what they're building. And the reason I say is because they didn't announce any exclusive games at all. I thought they would have some games ready. They had like nothing ready in terms of first party games to make you feel like you had to get this service now, you know? I mean, it's not ready now anyway. Apparently it won't be till like later 2019 from what we're hearing, and more information over the summer, which They're probably going to be E3. They might have a full dedicated booth at E3 for this thing, which, I mean, that's where you go to show off games, so yeah. But after hiring people like Jade Raymond to run this thing, they're probably going to have some decent enough exclusives, and that's where things start to get a bit interesting. Now, they dropped some hints here and there throughout this keynote, and I think that's the most interesting part is there are technically no traditional limitations on building a game here, and they really wanted to like beat into our heads that that was the case. So you might be wondering, what am I talking about here? Well, they kept mentioning that because it's all controlled at their data center, those blades we were talking about, the ones that are like 10.7 teraflops, are stackable. So if there is a vision that a studio has, say 1,000-person battle royale, which I wouldn't be shocked, by the way, if Google makes something like that. I really wouldn't. It's doable. So if you want to do something like that, if you want to do a very, I guess, immersive world that you have to figure out tricks and things to get it to work on an Xbox or a PlayStation, whether it's because the file size is like 300 gigabytes or something, or you don't have enough processing power there, those limitations are just gone. You just build what you want and that's it. That sounds really cool, because then we could probably see some really neat projects come from this. And I do think that some of the experience that they will give us are going to be pretty much impossible for some traditional home consoles to do, mostly because of those limitations. And of course, Stadia will continue to probably evolve and upgrade in the background without us even knowing about it. I mean, the only ones really to know are developers. All we know is we press a launch button and it launches, and that's it. So I like that about it, right? We'll see some crazy, crazy ambitious visions if they really want to do it. There's also cost involved there with studios, but then they don't have to worry about, to be honest, like compressing their assets or doing anything like that. The stream will do that for them. But that's actually a pretty cool thing to think about, is that there won't be any thing kind of keeping the developers from getting a little too ahead of themselves or anything. So I like to think about that. We could see some cool stuff there. Now, let's talk about some of the big issues here that we did not get out of this. One was exclusive games. We don't really know any reason to buy into this at all. And two, we don't know how to buy into it because they didn't give us a pricing. And that is a double-edged sword here. It could be a really good thing because there is no cost upfront for some stuff here, or it could be really bad because, well, it's going to be expensive. Now, here is what I would like to see from this service, and here's what I think is going to happen with the service. I would like to see a way for people to get in without having to pay any money outside of the game itself. So you buy a game, maybe you buy the new Assassin's Creed, for example, and all of a sudden you're playing it, right? Like, you don't have to worry about buying into a subscription service to stream the game. As long as you buy the game, you're in. But there is a higher option because they are claiming 4K 60 scalable to 8K at 120 frames per second. If you want 4K 60, you gotta spend the money on that. Much like how Hulu and Netflix will do that. If you want the higher option, you have to spend a little more for it. I feel like that could be the case. They give you 1080p 60 as basically a streaming service that you get in, kind of like how their Drive service where they'll offer you, 5 gigabytes for free, but if you want 100 gigabytes or a terabyte, you have to pay in a little extra for a subscription fee. That's kind of what I think might happen. I don't know if they'll do 720 60 as their free option, or maybe they really will just do 1080 60, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did that for free. Now, on the other side, that I think will probably happen is that it will just be a subscription service, and that is going to be much harder to get people on board with, especially people on cell phones who, let's be real, cell phone users like their free-to-play games. So Fortnite and any of the free-to-play cell phone games are much more popular than something you have to buy into, right? This is the way it is. So if they can make it so that it is straight up, no holds barred, you play, and that's it, people will enjoy that. You got to buy the game. That could also help them heavily with things like Apex Legends. All of a sudden, coming over to phones through their service, they would have a massive amount of people joining in, to where, of course, they can get information and all that stuff that Google likes to do. So, but they would immediately have tons of users interested. So that's another way to look at it there. The other problem, of course, is quality and issues with your internet. So if you don't have a good internet connection, I have no idea how you're going to benefit from this service, because it probably needs a decent connection for something like 4K 60. I remember they were asking for, I believe it was a 25 megabit connection down and like a 5 or 6 up for 1080p 60 with Assassin's Creed when I played that at the end of last year. I have a video up for it, but I keep seeing that like YouTube has it at 360p or something for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. But when I played it, I didn't have any issues, but I have a decent enough connection here with 40 up, which is the biggest thing, is the upload. Right. That's the biggest thing, is the upload. And I didn't really have any issues, but I do imagine a lot of people around the world, in the US even, are going to struggle if they have like a 10 megabit connection down and like a 2 up or something. That is a reality for a lot of people. So that is going to be one of the biggest growing pains, is that they have this vision that is beyond the infrastructure that we currently have in place for the internet. So Comcast, Verizon, whoever else out there needs to get on board. And I think when phones start getting 5G, that's when things will get much more interesting, because they will have a target audience on phones that all of a sudden have constant connections through 5G with little to no data cap, I'd like to assume, but they like to sell us on a 2 gigabyte data cap for a lot of people, or a 10 gigabyte data cap, which is something that home users with internet have to deal with as well. So you can see these hurdles start to mount up pretty quick, whether it's cost, internet speeds, internet data caps. There's a lot of issues there, but publishers, as you can tell, have been pushing heavily. And why are they pushing heavily? Because they want streaming to be mainstream. You might be wondering, why do publishers want this to be mainstream? Ubisoft, Capcom, these are companies that have already done streaming. Think about it. Assassin's Creed did streaming. We saw, of course, Resident Evil do streaming, right? So it's not like it's new for this to be a thing. But why do they want it to be mainstream? Well, they don't like console generations. That's number one. Because, well, whenever a console generation starts over, there's a transitional period. Think about the PlayStation 4 right now. It has almost 100 million people with a PlayStation 4 system. That is awesome for third parties. However, Sony's going to introduce the PS5 next year, and it's going to start from 0, which is not easy for third-party developers. That's why they end up doing cross-generation stuff, and all of a sudden, they're going to be developing for 3 different platforms: the PlayStation 4, the Pro, and the 5. So you can kind of see how those development costs mount up simply because there are separate generations. When they're streaming, there are no generations, right? None. There are no generations. So that's why they like that. And there's, of course, no barrier to entry. There's no $400 to $500 system. Ubisoft absolutely loves that. They've been preaching this streaming future forever now. Like, they desperately want that to be a thing, despite a lot of us who are more of the hardcore gaming audience isn't really on board with that. Ubisoft really wants that, and I have a feeling a lot of other publishers like EA, for example, they really want it as well. So we have no idea about cost, we have no idea about launch date, we just know 2019, and we have no idea about their first-party games outside of, I guess, their one studio that they have now that they're working with, and then apparently they're working with a bunch of third parties on unannounced exclusive projects, I guess, as well. So a lot of questions here, a lot. And we didn't really get as many answers as I would have liked to hear from this GDC live stream. But let me know what you guys think about this down below, because I just think there's a lot of questions out there and people are still trying to figure this out. I don't think it's for a lot of us that are probably watching YouTube right now, because a lot of us are probably playing on a PlayStation, an Xbox, or a Switch, or even on your PC. But I do think there is a subset audience that would like to play this. They might even just be the mainstream. You guys might be surprised. We might be overrun by streaming people playing these games with streaming. It could happen. That would be an interesting future. Let me know what you guys think down below, though. Make sure you like the video if you liked it, dislike if not. I'll see you guys next time.